Unlike every other race, the dwarves were created to kill monsters. Why? Well, it has to do with the exact period in which they were created by the god Aule, during which the world was covered with the most ferocious beasts it had ever seen. And it all started with a party, actually. A party that the gods, the Valar themselves, threw, in fact. In the very beginning of the world, known as Arda in Tolkien's universe, the gods toiled to make it habitable for the coming of the elves. You see, up to this point, the big plan was that the elves would be the first race of sentient beings to walk the earth, other than the gods known as the Valar and the Maiar, of course. And a long while after them, the race of men would wake up and join the world too. But before either came, the grand creator of the universe, Eru Ilúvatar, had tasked his children, the powerful gods of the world known as the Valar and Maiar, with refining Middle-Earth into something that, people could actually live in. The gods worked tirelessly to bring everything into creation. Most notably, Tolkien mentions in the Silmarillion that Yavanna, the goddess responsible for all living things, spotted the land with a diversity of trees, ferns, and perhaps even most of the animals. Besides her, two others did a great deal of physical work as well. Aule, who was pretty much the god of crafts and smithing, along with Tulkas, a warrior god, who physically toiled to sculpt the world, worked together to bring it about. Now, altogether, countless gods, of which the 14 Valar, which is the term for the most powerful of the gods, worked until they were beaten down by pure exhaustion. And when they finished working, they decided to have a party and relax. Which, by, all accounts, was a pretty big mistake. Because when they fell asleep, Melkor, an exiled Valar who wanted nothing more than to ruin his brothers' and sisters' work, came out of hiding. And he wasn't alone. Ages prior, he had lost a fight with the other Valar, and so he ran away in disgrace, but in the meantime, he had gathered a host of other lesser gods to join his cause. And when the Valar were resting, Melkor snuck into Middle-Earth, dug deep underground, and built a gigantic evil fortress known as Autumno. By his very nature, Melkor wanted to undo the work of the other gods, simply because he had his own particular vision for how existence should unfold. He resented his father, Eru Ilúvatar, for imposing a very specific, stifling plan on everyone, and so Melkor acted to undo all the work the Valar and Eru Ilúvatar had done. All the forest that Yavanna had sprouted became dark places that anyone would fear to travel in. All the animals that once roamed in harmony were suddenly covered in thorns and ivory, and they devoured each other mercilessly. They became monsters that craved carnage and destruction, and as Tolkien said in the Silmarillion, they dyed the earth with blood. The waters, which were the dominion of the god Ulmo, became slimy and unable to support life. Melkor even launched a second war against the Valar, and destroyed the source of the world's lights, which at this point weren't the sun and moon. The entirety of Arda was in chaos and the actual landscape was destroyed, which all the Valar, but especially Aule, Tulkas, and Ulmo, had worked so hard to achieve. In the destruction, the home of the gods, an island called Almarin, was completely wrecked, and the gods decided that they had to move far away from Middle-Earth. Now, they tried to get revenge against Melkor, but the fortress stronghold of Autumno, which was beneath Middle-Earth, mind you, was just too strong. If the Valar had used all of their strength to break in, they could probably have beaten Melkor. But the world had almost been destroyed during the relatively brief assault by Melkor on the island of Almarin already. Any more conflict would surely threaten Arda too greatly, and therefore the original plan of the creator god, Eru Ilúvatar. So, unfortunately, the Valar retreated to a distant continent and founded a separate kingdom there called Valinor. Since they couldn't figure out exactly how to remove Melkor from Middle-Earth, they stayed on Valinor for an age, completely neglecting their duties and allowing all of their creations to become evil corruptions of Melkor. Now, what does this have to do with the dwarves? You might be wondering why I gave you all this backstory before I delved into the actual answer to the question. Well, it's important that you know the exact type of world the dwarves were living in at the time, because this is a world that had giant monsters roaming it. And Melkor sat strong and rebellious in a fortress under the entirety of Middle-Earth, and evil gods imposed their will across the entire land. Now, In the histories, Tolkien isn't very specific about the shapes of these evil monsters, but based on what we actually know the creatures of the later ages would be, there are some safe assumptions to make about the threats that these early dwarves would have faced. Tolkien revealed that among the lesser gods who became evil, Balrog were first and foremost. But among the actual creatures in the lore, especially those often claimed to be older and fouler than orcs, there are only a handful. There's the Watcher in the Water, the guy outside the doors of Durin before the Fellowship of the Ring arrives in the Mines of Moria. That tentacled beast was perhaps among the early creatures that Melkor turned with his corruption. Perhaps even the nameless things that Gandalf describes as he fell through Moria battling the Balrog were one as well. And also the fell beasts which the Nazgul rode could have been beasts created during this era, during the time that Melkor was the sole god inhabiting Middle-Earth. While orcs and trolls were created during the years of the trees, which is the era that basically started with Melkor corrupting Middle-Earth, they weren't around yet during the time of the dwarves, since Melkor supposedly created them as a mockery of elves, which of course the dwarves were created before. So when Aule created the dwarves, he had greater enemies in mind. Obviously, a dwarf wouldn't be able to contend with a mighty Maiar like a Balrog, but it was with this type of evil and the other ancient evils like this that Aule created them so sturdy and capable with weapons. So when we ask ourselves, why were the dwarves designed to be so sturdy, so stubborn, so strong, and so compact and powerful, you really just have to look at the time that they were born into. It really doesn't have to do with anything, specific that Aule had in his mind about how perfect beings should look or even his own personal preferences. It really just had to do with wanting his personal children to be able to survive the really rough times the dwarves would face at that point during the years of the trees. Thanks for checking this out, guys. I hope to catch you in the next one.